Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to spend a bit of time with us to talk about password management. So we partner with LogMeIn to talk a bit about LastPass today. So joining me today, we have Lloyd Evans from LogMeIn. He's the product specialist from about LastPass. We also have Jeffrey Lim, who's a senior solution consultant, as well as Anthony Rosser, who is our channel manager from LogMeIn. So welcome all.
Oh, thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Okay, so I think what I would do, I'll pass right on to Lloyd to kickstart this because I think we have quite a bit of content to cover. And thank you again for attending our session today. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to enter them into the question panel in your GoToMeet webinar app. Without further ado, Lloyd, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Romney. Appreciate it. And thank you to everybody for tuning in today to run through password management, why it's important for you and your customers. We'll go through, hopefully you can see my slides now and start going through. So just as a bit of housekeeping before we kind of get started, the webinar will be recorded. We will share the deck post the event. It's a live Q&A, so feel free to put any questions that you might have within the question section of GoToWebinar, and we'll get started around why password management is so important for both you and your customers. You've obviously met me, Lloyd Evans. I'm the identity lead for LastPass for the LogMeIn business across JPAC. Jeffrey works very closely with me around the LastPass solution. He's a senior solutions consultant for LogMeIn LastPass. So what are we going to cover today? So we're going to discuss the password problem, I suppose, within APAC, the gaps that we see in the existing identity framework, human behavior, and then we're going to run through some of the MSP and MSSP packaging and pricing that you can deliver to your customers. So really thinking about start to finish, what's the problem, how do you address it, and what's the commercial model for you to manage it. Before we get started, we wanted to do a quick poll, so you can answer the poll questions. It'll be opening shortly. As you can see, do you currently use a password manager? Yes or no? Yes, we do, or no, we don't. We like to do this just as a good frame setting as part of the conversation, just so we know who uses one, and maybe some questions that might come up as part of the conversation. And we'll keep it open for a couple more minutes to see what the results are. It will be interesting. It tends to be a mixed bag. Sometimes people do use it. For the majority of people in Australia, we tend to find that it's pretty heavily swayed towards yes, because obviously passwords are a problem and continue to be so. We might close that poll now if we could, and if we could maybe just open up the results as well, just so that everyone can see them. I can't see them, so maybe if we can open that up. Here we go.
So similar to what you expected, Lloyd. So it looks like 65% are using a password management tool and 35% are not at this time. So I'll go ahead and hide the results and let you take it away.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, pretty standard, right? I think a lot of people tend to use password managers because obviously passwords are a problem and continue to be so. So, why is it? Well, let's have a look at what's actually happening from a global perspective, and then we'll kind of drill down into the APAC perspective. So if you look at most of the, three of the largest data breaches that have happened in recent times, obviously the T-Mobile one, and SolarWinds, and obviously the Colonial Pipeline breach, they all occurred due to compromised credentials. The T-Mobile breach, which just happened recently, was 53 million records were exposed as part of that breach. The SolarWinds attack actually happened through a weak password that the intern had. The former SolarWinds CEO actually announced that in a Congress press meeting. And the Colonial Pipeline attack, although it was a ransomware attack, it actually happened because they entered their environment through a bad password on a VPN. So these three very large data breaches, which were all touted as being sophisticated, aren't really sophisticated. They just effectively, criminals just walked in through the front door using a weak password. Now, when we look at the global statistic on the left-hand side, this was actually published by Verizon. It was produced by the Wall Street Journal. 85% of data breaches happen through the human element, i.e., I get sent a phishing link, I enter my password into the phishing site, and then my credentials then get exposed on the dark web, or criminals get access to it. And when we look more locally to the Australian market, 67% of data breaches are actually due to weak reuse or third-party compromised credentials. And so if you look at that graph there, that's actually produced by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. It's an Australian government body. It's called the Notifiable Data Breach Report, and it's been in place for about 3 years. So companies have to divulge when they've been breached, and they provide statistics on how they've been breached. And pretty consistently over that 3-year period, between 55 up to about 77% of the data breaches for the 6-monthly period when they're issued tend to be due to compromised credentials, be it through stolen, could be through phishing or brute force. And so I think there's a little bit of a misconception within the industry, in terms of the IT industry, that ransomware is this massive problem. It is a problem, but when you put it in comparison to credentials and passwords, it's really sort of pales in comparison. You can see on the chart there, 15% of the data breaches were due to ransomware, whereas the large majority were due to credential mismanagement. We've got a saying here at LastPass that hackers aren't hacking in, they're logging in. And you can see through those 3 large data breaches that we talked about at the start that effectively criminals are just using weak reused passwords to log into a customer's site, and then to either extract data from that site or lock it up as part of a ransomware attack. And it's effectively akin to having 10 windows in your house and effectively not locking them, just letting someone walk in, or at least enter through a window. And that's really what passwords are about. If your companies, if they're not securing these access points for passwords, then effectively they're leaving their front doors wide open. This graph here actually represents it's called dwell time, and it's effectively the time that a criminal actually sits in a customer environment. So in Australia, or in APAC specifically, it's 378 days. So that's the time that the criminal is spending within a customer site, looking around, looking for records, trying to find interesting information that they could either resell or repurpose. And it's actually globally, it's the highest out of any region. And part of the reason for this is that, as we saw on the graph at the start, that really we need to be thinking about the perimeter security, which now indirectly is everyone's homes, as everyone is working remotely. Again, just another report, just really providing more evidence and facts to this conversation. This is from the IBM data breach report, which gets published every year. Compromised credentials is the leading reason for breach in terms of vector, but it also takes the longest to identify. And part of the reason for that, as we sort of said before, is that if I'm a criminal and I'm using a legitimate password, which could be SolarWinds123 as an example, that makes it very difficult to be able to identify if that was actually someone just logging into a system or it was actually a criminal. And so by allowing your customers to manage credentials better, make them long and complex, and automate that process by using a password manager like LastPass, you're actually reducing a significant amount of risk, and you're getting visibility back into how staff are managing passwords. Are they reusing passwords? Are they long and complex? Because that will reduce actually a lot of security breaches for your customers. So let's have a look at the existing sort of identity stack. So when you look at most customer environments, they typically look a little bit like this. You may have some cloud applications like Office 365, G Suite, maybe Salesforce. You could be using something like Okta as an SSO provider, or Active Directory. And the main reason to do that is to try and capture all of these enterprise applications within one spot, make it easy for staff to log in. They don't have to think about passwords, maybe using SSO or MFA as a way to manage that credential landscape. But the problem is that most applications for most companies actually either don't federate back into AD or they sit outside of the AD environment. So when you think about things like, maybe it's social media accounts for your customer site. So think about Facebook, Instagram, they typically don't sit in an AD environment. You've got things like shadow IT that are used by maybe IT teams of your customers, but maybe not necessarily indirectly federated back into an enterprise service. And then you've got other things like shared credentials. So, you may have a remote desktop service that you're using. Maybe there's multiple people logging in. You need to share that credential. It could be a CEO needing to share access to certain applications with his EA or PA. It could be finance teams that have shared passwords for bank accounts for corporate. And so you need a way to be able to make it easy for them to be able to manage that for joint accounts, but also being able to audit against it. So if I log in, you need to know when I do it versus somebody else, as an example. And in a lot of cases, this doesn't sit within the AD environment. The other component to this is privileged access management. So servers, databases, public-private keys, those type of things typically sit outside of that. And so where does LastPass sort of fit in? We act as the umbrella across all applications, not just the stuff that sits within AD, it's everything else that's outside of that. The problem is that most companies now are adopting so much cloud technology, especially working remotely, is that there's a lot of longer tail risk with this type of stuff that isn't federated back into an AD service. And so LastPass is an easy way to capture all of that componentry under an enterprise password management. And then on top of that, you can just layer MFA over the top. It makes it very easy, seamless to be able to manage, audit, and govern these type of credentials that are very prevalent within most environments that we talk to. And look, really, I mean, the thing is a bad passwords happen to good people. We see it time and time again. The amount of stories that I've heard about CEOs that have reused their LinkedIn password for their corporate AD environment or other cloud services, it's pretty prevalent. And we still hear about people keeping passwords on spreadsheets and post-it notes, which, to be honest, it's not a good way to manage credentials and passwords generally. And the other thing that comes up a lot now is you think about all the passwords that you have both in your personal life and your work life. For most people, that's exceeding about 191 on average. And so the ability for any staff member for companies that you work for or your customers' companies, it just becomes almost impossible. You can't have long, complex passwords for 191 services that you need to manage both across work and home. And that's kind of where LastPass comes in. So with the volume of credentials that we have, we end up in this situation where human behaviors and, let's say, poor habits and cognitive dissonance, i.e. the idea that you know the right thing to do but you don't do it because it's problematic, becomes the issue. We saw this as part of the statistic I showed at the start. The Wall Street Journal had published 85% of data breaches were due to human error. And this is pretty much the problem that arises, is that 91% of people know that using the same password or a variation of the passwords is a risk. You're putting your data at risk, but most people still use the same password, 66% of people. A lot of people have their credentials compromised in breaches. Facebook got breached, Instagram's been breached, LinkedIn, the list goes on. But the reality is most people don't do anything about it, they don't change it, partially because it's hard, it's problematic. You're going to send off a password reset and you get a token or some sort of OTP code back. And it just becomes problematic. Where do you store it? How do you manage those passwords if you've got to reset them all the time? And so using a secure vault like LastPass as password manager to be able to do that makes it easy for both myself, obviously working, but also at home for myself and my family as well. And so it's super important to think about the blurred lines between corporate and personal security, because they do overlap, especially when it comes to passwords. Now, we do show this comic from time to time again, so apologies if there are any Daves on the call, but it comes back to the point that it's human error, right? We can deploy things like firewall, SSO technology, we can deploy things like MFA, but the reality is that data breaches are still happening through human error. People using shadow IT, having weak passwords, reusing those same passwords across multiple applications. And all I have to do as a criminal is send you a link that looks legitimate, like a phishing site, and they ask you to enter your password. Because most people know their passwords, they enter it into the phishing site, and that's where we actually reduce quite a bit of risk for phishing. Is because if you can't be phished if you don't know it, right? So good way to think about it. Now, so that's the problem. We're sort of talking about the problem, and let's talk about a bit more around the pricing and packaging. So how would you position this conversation to your customers as we sort of roll through? So we have a number of customers already that are already doing this. They're providing cybersecurity services to their customers today. It could be just as a standalone password management as a service. So you think about just selling them as a standalone type of offering. We've done this before, and so you can wrap a service around the use of LastPass and password management. So being able to audit, manage, and comply with regulatory positioning, but also thinking about how do they uplift general cybersecurity for their business. You could wrap it as part of a fixed price MSP offering. So if you're already providing a fixed price service to your customer today, you can include this as part of the service that you deliver. And if you're providing MSSP, so managed security services, you could also wrap the password management as a service component within to that offering as well. And so when you think about it, a lot of companies will think about securing identity. You're probably doing things like maybe deploying multi-factor authentication for them, which is one factor. But if they have other cloud services that sit outside of the enterprise, which most companies do, from my experience, I haven't come across very many companies that don't. You can provide password management as a service, manage it on their behalf, and provide an additional level of access control for your customers. A few other options here, if you're doing like full-blown cloud security services, digital risk and identity as part of the service, governance or GRC, so being able to audit against how staff are actually managing credentials across the board. And we also do another thing called the security score, which looks at a benchmarking around how staff are managing credentials. And then endpoint protection, if you're providing any level of AV protection, firewall monitoring, anything like that, you can wrap services around LastPass as part of that as well. Phishing protection, password auditing, automate password rotation, dark web monitoring, and securely sharing of passwords. All of that is available through LastPass Business. So let's have a look at some of the common areas in terms of like where are the use cases, where are we reducing risk for customers. And so really when we think about it, as we sort of talked about before, most companies will have a level of AD, Active Directory, but they'll have a whole heap of other cloud services that sit outside of that. And so what we're really doing is improving the credential management landscape for customers, helping them manage their identities better, and removing the risks around human error. So things like storing passwords on post-it note spreadsheet, that sort of thing. Reducing the gaps that we talked about before, so that's a common area for us. Phishing is probably one of our largest use cases. So when you think about it, people get phished because they know their password for the most point. Most phishing attacks are really trying to scrape passwords from users to be able to use that again and again as they roll through. And so by the function of using LastPass, we don't present the credentials to the fake website, and it's only if it's trusted in the vault itself that we're able to present the username and password. Reduce third-party risk. So this really comes in, especially for blue chip customers. As an example, you may be managing client sites for your customers, and so we're able to do that, provide you access to their environments, being able to manage the credentials between those sort of third-party use cases that we talk about quite often, and also onboarding and offboarding partners as you need to do componentry in their environment as well. And then governance and compliance is really looking at, for certain industries, especially for critical infrastructure is coming in as part of that bill, for financial services businesses where CP234 is required. It's really just providing a higher level of governance and control around access. And this is actually becoming more prevalent, especially with the NDB report, which is coming out pretty regularly. So you need to actually report on when a data breach has happened. You can't do that if a criminal is just walking your front door using a weak password. This is just a quick sort of run through of a password reset example we did for another customer of ours where they saved close to $450,000 per year. That's US dollars, just by the volume of password resets they were doing. So we run an ROI for our customers to look at, are there other ways just outside of those other common use cases to actually drive more value around the return on investment for LastPass. And this was looking at a payback period of 47 days across 4,000 users. And this is only assuming a 50% adoption rate of the product. So it was pretty valuable for this customer. There are other use cases for this customer specifically, but yeah, we're able to reduce a lot of risk and provide them a very strong return on the investment. So now I'm going to hand over to Jeff to run through the LastPass demonstration. Please make sure that you're pushing any questions to the question chat section, and we'll look forward to answering some of these as we wrap up in the end. So thank you, and over to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Lloyd. Morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Let me know if you're not. Okay, it should be fine. Right, okay, LastPass is installed, has a browser extension to all your different type of browsers. It works with different operating system, and it's also available on your mobile devices, right? So it's easy to use from a user perspective, and at the same time, it gives the organization control of how you manage your passwords, how you store, how you access, and also part of the governance, being able to track what's been accessed, etc. And all within this security realm that the administrator doesn't have access to the individual password. So it still maintain that level of security. So in my example here, I'm going to run through two different scenarios with two different I'm going to wear two different hats. I'm going to wear, the first one is as a user, then I'm going to show you as the administrator. Now, the first thing is when the user logs in, it is part of the browser extension, and most users would be familiar with a password manager. Most of the time, you get the password manager as part of your browser. In this case, we replace that because we know that the password manager on a browser is not secure. Anyone can get access to your browser, and once they have access to your browser, they can see all the different passwords. Whereas the passwords and content that is stored in LastPass is securely encrypted, and you need to have a master password or your single sign-on, and you can also layer MFA to get access to it. So as an example, once you're in here, if I go to a website and if I sign in, for example, I'm signing to my Dropbox or to my Netflix, it already has automatically picked up the account that I have in my LastPass and filled it up for me. I could also even fill up my credit card if there's a credit card form in that particular page. So all this is done within the LastPass and in the browser itself. Now, once you're in the LastPass Vault as a user, I think Lloyd mentioned one of the things that is available to the user is basically the dark web monitoring and the security dashboard. So in here, in my Vault, basically, I can store anything in my Vault, from passwords, secure notes, my bank account, down to software licenses. So it's basically up to you. Just basically use your imagination to store anything that you want to be secured, or if you want to even share it out in the later stage. Once you have the items, so these are all my different logins to different accounts, etc. Now, once you have that, you can go to your security dashboard. The security dashboard gives you a view of your security status. It gives you a score. So from there, we can look at the different passwords that you have, whether the passwords have been reused, whether the password is a weak password, etc. So like in this example here, in my password security score, I can see that there's a couple of passwords that has been reused. It has told me that, okay, there's a risk in reusing password. You can use LastPass to generate a random secure password for you. So you don't have to crack your head and think of what password should I use, etc. So even like if there's a weak password here with 0 because it's using welcome 1. Okay, that's a very, very weak password. Now, on top of it, we also provide dark web monitoring. As you can see here, these are all the email addresses that I have using for my credentials to log into all the different sites, etc. In this example here, Randy here has been compromised and has been detected by the dark web monitoring. And straight off, it tells me that, okay, this site has been breached, right? And these are the data that has been compromised. So, and obviously what you need to do now is to quickly change your password or do the appropriate steps to remediate that particular breach within that site. So from a user perspective, you are proactively alerted if there's any breach through the dark web monitoring. Now, the other thing with LastPass, and like Lloyd mentioned, is sharing of credentials. Typically in the old ways, if you need to share credentials, you put it on an email, you send someone that particular email, or you write it on a post-it note and shuffle it around, or you send someone a text message. Not very secure, and if someone does change the password, then you have to go through the whole process again. Now, with LastPass, you can share credentials very, very easily. All you have to do is just go into our sharing center, create a shared folder, so you can put the things that you want to share in that particular shared folder. And the next thing is to define who has access to that particular shared folder. Like in this example, I have all these different shared folders. Okay, and let's say we're going to the accounting shared folder, and I want my team, my accountants and human resource, etc., to have access to the content. Now, all I have to do now is just invite members into that particular shared folder. It can be a group, it can be individual users. And once I have that, it's basically defining the access. So in many ways, we do act as a quasi-PAM. So you can have that privileged access, and it's all done by the user. You don't need an administrator to set this up. So in this case, I have different users here. So I have the human resource, and say, for example, I'm going to give them read-only access. I don't want them to make any changes, etc. I've got this guy, Jeffrey here, who has full read-write access. And I have Jennifer that has read access and the password hidden, right? And I can also make Joe here as an administrator, right? Once I'm done, save that. Okay, next is go back to all my items, and that's my accounting shared folder. So these are all the different items that are in there. And if I need to move, say, my 0 into that particular shared folder and give everyone access to it, it's as simple as drag and drop, right? Once I've done that, all the users within that shared folder will now have access to 0. So all they have to do is go into their vault. They will see, okay, on my vault, I will see 0. I can launch, I can click on it, I can find, okay, what's the passwords, etc. So it's as easy as that. And then if for some stage later, I need to take out Twitter, right? The accounting team, they have no use for Twitter. I just have to drag, and that's gone. So when they log in the next time, the Twitter account will be removed from their shared folder. And similar, it can be anything. It could be an server access to the database, etc., and that's done. Okay. So from a sharing perspective, it's as simple as creating a shared folder, putting content into the shared folder, defining who has access to that shared folder, and it's all done by the user themselves. So from a user perspective, very straightforward, very easy, and it's very lightweight. Again, just a quick recap from the user perspective, all you need is just the browser extension. Once you install the browser extension, that's where you can manage your vault from the browser extension. Now, switching hats, we're going to switch to the administrator. Okay, what's the difference between your normal password manager and LastPass. Well, one of the key differentiator with LastPass is now you have access to a lot more information about your users. So for example, here I've just switched my hat. I'm now running as the administrator. As the administrator, first thing you come in, you get a view of all your users. Keep the average security score of your users. So the score of the users now get rolled up to the administrator. The administrator can see, okay, what's my score of all my users? Anyone that has a weak security challenge score that I can approach and remediate that, etc. So I can look at my full report. Okay, anyone that has duplicate passwords or duplicate passwords being used in different sites, or they have blank passwords, etc. So let's say in this case, I want to know which users have duplicate passwords and they're being used in multiple sites. If I click on that, that gives me that particular user. So we have two LastPass 13 partners and LastPass JTAG. Now, I want to drill down a bit more onto those users. Just a matter of going back to the users, LastPass JTAG, right? That's one. And if I go in there, I can see, okay, with this user, what's happening there? I can look into this specific user and I can see, wow, this user has has 5 blank passwords, a couple of duplicate passwords, and those duplicate passwords are used on 22 different sites. And not only that, this user has a lot of weak passwords, 34. So this user, by right, is a security risk. And then I can go and approach that user and have a chat with that user and see what we can do to increase their security score and their security posture. That's from an administrator perspective. Now, the other thing is with the LastPass business, you can easily integrate with your directory. So if you have an Active Directory, a 080, an Okta, or OneLogin, and coming soon Google Workplace, you can easily integrate with that. So that provides you with a single source of truth. So all your users can be provisioned and deprovisioned from your single directory. We also provide what we call a federated login. So LastPass becomes another single sign-on app to your repertoire of single sign-on applications. So when you sign into your LastPass, basically you're using your single sign-on credentials. So from a user perspective, there's only one password they need to remember, which is their single sign-on. And once they're in LastPass, they gain access to all the different passwords to all the different applications that are not on single sign-on, right? So they give them that flexibility there. Okay. Now, another key differentiator with LastPass is you have access to a suite of policies. And these policies will help you to drive your security posture. You know, how secure and how tough is your security versus how easy for the user. So in this case, we won't go through all the different policies, but you have access to about 110 policies. And the policies ranges from things like what we recommend. So things like the minimum length of the passwords. If you log off from your browser, we can log you off from your session, etc. To things like access control. So you can define access based on IP addresses, by country, by devices. If they're coming from a mobile device, you can block them off for specific reasons, and even down to session lifetime. So going back to the example, if they log off, if they get into, say, a screensaver mode, we can actually log off that session from them, etc. Right. The other thing that from a policies is password rules. So this is standard, you know, how many characters you want to set for your passwords, etc. But one of the key things that I like is the account restrictions. So with the account restrictions, you can set a whole bunch of policies, things like whether you allow them to export the content of their vault. So for security purposes, you don't want to allow them to export. So in this case, you can turn that on, and that feature of export, like in this case, if I go into my LastPass, right, and under my advanced, I have import. I can import passwords into my vault, but because this is turned on, I can't export it out, right? So now I can turn that on. Now, the other thing is, even like with sharing, you can allow sharing. In this case, sharing is turned on, but it is limited to this set of organizations. So you can define who you can share with, etc. So from an administrator perspective, now you have that control. It's not just you can share with anyone, but you can only share with specific organizations, right, etc. And lastly, okay, things like multi-factor. If your organization is not using multi-factor or they have issues trying to implement multi-factor, now you can easily implement multi-factor across all your different applications that does not support multi-factor. Right? In this case, the moment they log into LastPass, they will be required to use an MFA. And all I have to do is just turn on this particular option, require the use of MFA, and I also have the ability to choose which MFA to use, whether it's the LastPass Authenticator or YubiKey or Microsoft Authenticator, and etc. So it gives them that easy and flexible use of MFA. So that's from a policies perspective. Like we won't go through, like I said, we won't go through all the policies. That's like 110 different policies. Now, from a reporting, you have access to a suite of reporting. So every activity from the user is captured in our user activity report. Like from earlier, I move a specific item into the accounting, or if I open a site, if I'm not a user, and let's say if I go into Google and I launch that, okay, that's an activity there. And if I come back to my LastPass report, and if I do a refresh, that particular activity now is logged. You can see from a user perspective, from an admin perspective, that user has logged into the Google account. And if I click on it, that gives me the information of like the IP address, when was the user at the time, date, all that pertaining information that you can easily output that to a scene, right? So that's from a reporting perspective. Now, from an MSP perspective, what can I do to manage my customers? Now, from an MSP perspective, we integrate with Datto and ConnectWise. So you can, once you have that integrated, we can get all your customers from any of those two systems, right? So once you have that integrated, it's basically coming into the managed companies, right? And you can actually import all those users or all those customers from your PSA setup. So like in this case, if my setup is with ConnectWise, I just have to select, okay, that's the one that I want, all the active customers, or and I want that to be active. Click on that, and it basically goes into my ConnectWise and retrieve all the list of customers that I have. So in this case here, these customers are already using LastPass because they are mapped, and these are all the new customers. I just have to select them and continue, and we will bring that customer across into LastPass. Once we have that, I'm just going to leave this. You can see this is the list of all the customers that we have. Now, the good thing with LastPass, you are only billed on the active licenses. Okay, you'll be given a set of licenses, a pool of licenses that you can easily allocate and distribute to your customers. Now, they might have like 10 licenses, but they're using 5, then they're only billed on that specific 5 active licenses. Now, in this case, I want to show you how you can easily manage your customers. Now, once you have in here, you can see all your different customers that you are managing or the companies that you're managing. So for example, if I want to manage Arsenal, I'm just going to manage, and it brings me into the same dashboard. In this case, this dashboard is for Arsenal Football Club, and you go through the same process. You can see if there's any security challenge or the score of your customer, if the number of users, the licenses they have consumed, etc. And you can easily go in here, set up their policies, because each customer might have a different policy that is different from another customer, etc. So they might have different access control, different account restrictions, different type of administration, etc. So you go in there, you set that up for that specific. Again, they also might have their own different integrations from a directory perspective, etc. Right? So you can go in there, set up the directory integration, their federated login. If they need to do that, if they don't need a federated login, they can use a master password. Right? In this case, I have the different users here. I have some users that have been invited. They have not activated their account, so that's why it's sitting in the invited users stage. And once you're done managing that particular organization, then it's just basically going back to the primary account, right? And you go through the next company that you manage. So it gives you that flexibility that how you can manage your customers, and you have the view of how those customers form their security policies, etc. So same thing, if I can go into, let me pick one, let's say Black Rooster here, and that will be a different organization that you are managing, right? And they would have their own reporting, and you can also define their own administrator, right? You can set up their own administrator to manage their own environment, but you as an MSP, you do have overseeing rights to that particular account. Okay. Once you're done, then it's just basically back to your primary dashboard. So with that, I'll pass it back to Lloyd, and we can take you to Q&A and other parts of continue with the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeffrey. I think we're going to talk through some questions. I saw a couple of questions come through, so keep them coming. I think one of them, maybe if Jess, if you wanted to maybe cover, just maybe shout out the questions and we can answer them as we sort of run through, if that's okay. Might be an easy way to do it. Thanks, Jeff, for the presentation. That was good.
No worries.
Step through.
Excellent. Thank you, Lloyd and Jeffrey. So yeah, Lloyd pointed out we have a couple of questions, so keep them coming. So let me start by this one from Wei. So Wei asks, can LastPass be configured to have exclusion websites so it does not pop up and interfere with the login passwords?
Okay, I will most likely take that. Yes, LastPass, you can configure exclusion websites, so it can be done by the user, and it also can be done by the administrator. You can set up what we call a global push out to all the users that for this particular sites, LastPass will not save the password. So it can be done, and it's all done from the account settings.
Great, excellent. So we have a second question here from Stephen. So Stephen asks, can a customer manage personal and work passwords in the same license, or would they need 2 licenses to keep them separate?
No, so when we do, like, let's say a business deployment as an example, when we deploy what we call a site license to all staff, we also provide them with a personal license as well, for both the consumer to use outside the office. In addition to that, we also provide families as a benefit, so people for outside the office can use it as well for their families. And so within region, or globally, I should say, the LastPass business has about 85,000 business customers globally. Within region, it's about 7,000 across the whole of APAC. And we are the only provider that's IRAP assessed by the Australian government. So that's a federal government standard for security and data protection. It's part of the reason why we've been quite successful here in region. And it's actually funnily enough, we actually do get a lot of consumers of LastPass coming to us looking for the business product, which actually comes up quite a bit. And I think the reason for that is that the actual brand itself, like the LastPass brand, is well known within region. We actually have the highest per capita usage of the personal product out of any region across the globe. And so I think that just sort of comes back to the poll that we ran at the start. 65% of the people on the call actually use password manager. In probably a lot of cases that may be LastPass. I'm not sure of the split, but it is well known, and a lot of existing IT directors, CIOs, CISOs actually know of us, and so we tend to get quite a bit of business just through that. And I think from blue chip partners, you'll be surprised if you just ask a simple question like to your customers, like, how are you managing passwords today? Have you heard of LastPass? Like, that's a pretty easy, open question to at least get the ball started. And obviously the team, through myself and obviously Anthony Roast, who runs the blue chip account, we can provide other areas of reach out for you guys to be able to get out and talk to your customers about password management. Because at the end of the day, if you look back at the statistics that are actually being produced by the Australian government, 67% of data breaches in this country are due to compromised credentials, i.e. passwords. So if your customers aren't thinking about it or haven't done anything about it yet, it's probably a relatively easy way for them to reduce risk for cyber breaches, because it's being talked about across the board. But hopefully that answers the question. Let me know if there are any others. More than happy to answer them while we've got a bit more time left for the webinar.
Thank you. I just got another question came in. So what about password for terminal logs in and SSH and so on? Was there something that LastPass can help?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. With LastPass, it's not just your browser passwords. It's, like I say, it's up to your imagination. If you go into the LastPass Vault, we have what we call templated items. So in the templated items, you can store browser passwords, you can store nodes, addresses, servers, SSH keys, routers, firewalls, and everything. And the most recent one is we've been storing our COVID-19 vaccination cert into LastPass. That provides you with a secured location to store basically anything. So it's up to, like I say, it's use your imagination to store anything in LastPass. And once you have that in LastPass, then next thing is, well, do I need to share this with my colleagues or with my supply chain, or if I'm doing business with someone, how can I provide a way to securely share that? And that's all done through the sharing center. So, to answer Way's question, yeah, it's up to you. You can definitely logins, SSH keys, anything. So use your imagination. That's the best thing I can sum it up.
Yeah, I'd probably just add. Yeah, sorry, just to add to that. I was just going to say, just to add to that, I think a lot of our customers do use the LastPass Vault for a number of different reasons, like not just storing credentials and passwords. So you think about most client environments, if they've got anything in any sort of cloud environment, be it public or private, there are always keys with that, right? So a lot of customers use LastPass to store public-private keys. We have a lot of customers that store like development code actually within LastPass itself. So there are a number of different ways to be able to manage it. Yeah, as Jeff said, just use your imagination. Anything that you think needs to be stored somewhere secure, not on a spreadsheet, not on a post-it note, not in a file on the C drive, right, or whatever, wherever it might be. It really needs to be stored somewhere encrypted in a vaulting system like a password manager like LastPass. And plenty of different reasons to use it for sure.
Thank you, Lloyd. So the question follow up from Wei is that, so if the passwords are stored inside LastPass, you just need to copy and paste it into, let's say, a terminal login.
Yes. So with LastPass, because it's a browser extension, if you are running off a browser, it can do the autofill for you. But if you are having like a terminal or a third-party application, client-server application, obviously we don't have a way to fill into those mechanisms, those applications for you. And it's just a matter of cut and paste. And if you look at it, if you don't have a LastPass to store that type of credential, you'll be storing into like a Word document on an Excel spreadsheet, which is not secure in the first place. And you still be doing a cut and paste, typically if you store in an Excel spreadsheet, you still have to go into the Excel spreadsheet and cut and paste into that terminal. But the key thing is, how secure is that Excel spreadsheet or in that Word document or in that text file versus storing in a encrypted vault. And that vault can only be decrypted with your master password or your single sign-on. Now, the thing is with LastPass, we work on a zero knowledge architecture. It means that even LastPass itself, we can't get access to your vault. I think Lloyd, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was a case with, I think it was an FBI that subpoenaed LastPass to gain access to a criminal's vault. And the only thing that we can supply is, here is the IP address that someone accessed the vault, and that's about it. We don't have any backdoor or way to gain access to the content of the vault.
Yeah, and I think, Jeff sort of hit it on the head, right? You've effectively got two options. If you're trying to store terminal passwords, either you store it on a Word document or it's on an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, which, as Jeff said, it's not really that secure, right? If someone gained access to your environment, I've heard of cases where criminals have just basically, done copy find, look for a spreadsheet that knows passwords, right? And that's and it's unfortunate, right? But a lot of people store it that way. Or your other option is really to put it into a digital vault, right? Like a password manager, and that's basically what it is, digital vault. As Jeff sort of touched on, that actually was you can publicly search it. The Drug Enforcement Agency actually subpoenaed LastPass to provide details for a specific vault. We can't provide any information because the information is not known to us. The encryption and decryption happens at the user's end. We don't have any access to the information, right? We're just a conduit, obviously providing the service to allow people to manage that more effectively. So hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, many use cases for LastPass, not obviously just the web browser auto-filling passwords, but the majority of stuff that we see nowadays, because of these cloud services, most of it will be web-based for the most part. A good question. I'm surprised we haven't had a question about passwordless. That normally comes up.
Well, okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions at the time being. We do have a few more minutes. So maybe I can ask a question to you, Lloyd. I know
Sure.
LastPass has multiple products. One of them is LastPass Teams. So if my customer say, hey, why would I want to pick LastPass Business over Teams? What are some of the answers I can get back to him?
Yeah, I mean, I think LastPass Teams was basically built for very small businesses, right? Like sort of sub 5 users, and the majority of the reason for that was for LastPass Business because of the Active Directory integration. Probably the main thing that I would say. Most companies will have some level of AD. Being able to federate a LastPass Business service into that is probably one of the more specific reasons why people purchase LastPass Business. And as I said before, like the majority of our customers, especially in globally, even in APAC, majority of them use LastPass Business, which is obviously more for companies, right? Larger companies or larger companies of 5 people would be probably my direct answer to that question.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you.
To add on to Lloyd, the other difference with Teams and Business is there's very, very limited number of policies that you have within Teams. So I think it's only like 10 or 15, 20 max policies versus to the 100+ policies in LastPass Business. So that's one of the key things. So with the policies, you have more control on the security of your environment. And the other one is, I think, which is makes no brainer, is with LastPass Business, you get access to family as a benefit. That gives you another 5 additional accounts, for your family to have LastPass within their environment. So that is basically a no-brainer, with a LastPass Business.
Thank you very much. So I'm just conscious of your time and busy schedule, everyone on the call today. So let me thank you again for the LogMeIn LastPass team to joining us today and presenting us, and thank you for the attendees for today's sessions. So we will be sending out the gift cards shortly to all the attendees on this particular webinar. If you do have any questions, please reach out to us at lastpassmsp@bluechipit.com.au. Thanks again for everyone who attend, and bid you a good day.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Romney.